This is what we call a live-action adaptation. These types of adaptations are a problem, and today we're going to go through the varying types of live-action adaptations and why they're such a problem. Before we discuss the state of adaptations in 2025, it's important that we go back to the turn of the century to see where the real problems began. Also, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, but more on that later. The 2000s really saw the launch of the Blockbuster Era. Franchises such as Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, X-Men, Spider-Man, and plenty of others really started to take shape. What do these franchises all have in common, however? They were adaptations of existing stories. Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter were direct adaptations of books, while X-Men and Spider-Man were loose adaptations of comic books. It was really after the success of Lord of the Rings that these big studios realized the true potential of adapting existing properties. I would be naive to say that no adaptations existed before the 2000s. Not many of you know that Jurassic Park was technically an adaptation of the book of the same name. But when it came to blockbuster franchises, on the big screen, these were entirely new properties. Star Wars, Aliens, Indiana Jones, these are not based on books. They were completely new stories. Come the 2000s, especially with Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, books were being adapted into entire movie franchises. What is the issue here? Well, studios were no longer looking at books for inspiration for their movies. They were looking at popular books because they knew the size of their potential audience. If Warner Brothers were to make a Harry Potter movie, they know they would immediately have people who would want to see the movie just because of their love of the books. The Lord of the Rings movies are obviously great movies, but do you think they would initially be as popular if the Lord of the Rings books weren't arguably the most famous fantasy books ever made? When Lord of the Rings went into production, Warner Brothers financed all 3 films at once so they could be made at the same time. Do you think they would take this big of a risk on a story that didn't already have an existing audience? No way! Sticking with Warner Brothers, do you think they would finance 8 Harry Potter movies if the Harry Potter books weren't the most popular fantasy books of the 90s and 2000s? No way! So studios unlocked the key to putting butts in theaters. They preyed on your love for a story they didn't create. Now, I'm not trying to say any adaptation is inherently bad. As I said before, the Lord of the Rings movies are probably the best adaptations ever made. The Harry Potter movies aren't perfect, but for the most part, they are well done. This is because the people involved in the productions of these projects had deep love for the source material. Peter Jackson's passion for the Lord of the Rings is undeniable. This is because Jackson understood that if you're gonna prey on an audience's love for a story for your own financial gain, you owe it to the fans of said source material that you are going to stay as faithful as possible. This is something I am not gonna back down on. I get that movie or show adaptations require changes. I get that not every adaptation can be a perfect one-to-one remake, but you still owe it to the fans that you stay as faithful as possible. About 2 months ago, I made a video discussing the Harry Potter film The Goblet of Fire. In that video, I mentioned how the director of the film, Mike Newell, seemed to have some big issues with the book. He seemed to hate that the Goblet of Fire book was so long and felt that it could be trimmed to make the story more effective. He may or may not be right about the book, but that's not his place to decide. If you're gonna make changes from the book, it better be because you think it will better serve the medium, not because you think you know better than the author of the original book. I may have my issues with the Goblet of Fire film, but despite the director's attitude towards the source material, the movie did turn out alright. For the next decade, Hollywood proceeded to keep making these adaptations and kept racking in billions of dollars. While not everything was a direct adaptation, Hollywood eventually became known for making sequels, reboots, and remakes over and over again. The new Star Wars movies may not have been adaptations of any existing books, but they did prey on your love for the original Star Wars movies, so it is kind of like an adaptation. The most famous example of an adaptation in the 2010s was easily Game of Thrones. These books were massive and would by no means be easy to adapt, But initially, the showrunners tried to stay as faithful as possible, and it turned out to be the most successful show of the 2010s. Only once did they run out of books to adapt did the show really start to decline. Now, despite the repeated successes and failures of book adaptations, at the end of the day, I would actually encourage that Hollywood make more of these. Books and movies, or books and shows, are drastically different mediums. Books can go far more in depth into characters and worlds that movies never could, but movies can provide something that books simply can't: music, acting, visual effects, a shared viewing experience. Even though the story is hopefully just being repeated for a new audience, how you experience this story is so different that it's worth retelling. Very few things in life brought me more joy than sitting in a theater watching the 20th anniversary of Return of the King with my friends. This is an experience a book could never capture. So again, as long as you stay faithful, I encourage book adaptations. In the late 2010s, and especially in the 2020s, we saw the rise of video game adaptations. Now, these types of adaptations are quite different. Video games share a lot of similarities to movies and shows. Music, acting, visual effects, cinematography, shared experiences are all a part of both video games and movies. Despite the similarities, I actually don't mind these adaptations, and here's why. There are brilliant stories told through video games, and it doesn't matter how good those games are, some people simply will never experience them because they are video games. My mother loves a good story, but she's not going to drop $400 on an Xbox and $70 on a game to play a new video game, especially when she's never played a video game in her life. When HBO announced that they were making an adaptation of The Last of Us, I was quite excited. A bunch of people who I know never played the game could now experience the story for the first time. Thankfully, the first season of the show was a fairly faithful adaptation, and it turned out to be pretty great. But some video games are easier to adapt than others. The Last of Us is definitely a great game, but I would argue the selling point of that game is the story. What happens when the selling point of a game is not the story, but the gameplay? This is what we got with two video games that recently got adaptations: Halo and Fallout. The shows for both these games I recently did videos on, and in those videos I discussed how different those shows are. The Fallout show was made by people who clearly loved the games. The heads at Bethesda refused to make a Fallout show unless they knew it matched their vision of the franchise. They understood how damaging a bad adaptation could be for their brand. So it wasn't until Christopher Nolan's brother, Jonathan Nolan, showed up for Bethesda to feel comfortable making the show. Many Fallout fans may be frustrated with some of the contradictions in the lore, but for the most part, they were pleased with the adaptation. The Halo show, on the other hand, took the exact opposite approach. 343 Industries seemed to want to make a Halo show regardless of who was behind the camera. They ended up hiring a guy who had not only never once played the Halo games, but openly admitted that while making the show, they never even looked at the games. What we ended up getting was a show that showed no respect for the source material at all. It was as if the writers used the Halo property to bring in an existing audience and then tell their own completely different story with a Halo skin over it. This is embarrassing and pathetic. The Fallout show made an attempt to not only honor the lore of the games, but the feeling of the games too. At times, watching the Fallout show feels like you were playing the games. The Halo show did no such thing. They turned a game that was a military shooter about the survival of humanity against an alien alliance into a sci-fi interpersonal character drama where people complain about their parents the whole time. This is wrong. If you're gonna rely on my love for the Halo games for the success of your show, then you bet your ass I and many others will rip you to shreds if you make a mockery of the source material. But, as I said before, at the end of the day, I do not mind video game adaptations. Now, along with the rise of video game adaptations, we saw the rise of the real problem in the Hollywood industry, and that's live action adaptations. It's one thing to take a book and adapt it. It's also another thing to take a video game and adapt it. But what we have been seeing is studios taking animated movies and shows and simply adapting them into live action. This is where my big issues lie, because I loathe these types of adaptations so much. Some of my favorite stories ever are animated projects: The Clone Wars, Avatar: The Last Airbender, WALL-E, aka my favorite movie ever made. When a studio comes out and says, we want to adapt this animated movie into live action, you're basically telling me that animation is an inferior medium of storytelling. You're telling me that a viewer cannot truly appreciate a story unless it's in live action. Screw you. Why on earth would I watch the live action adaptation of a movie or show when the original and much better animated movie or show is usually available on the same streaming service? Animation is not an inferior medium, and I am tired of these studios thinking they are. It's not like adapting a book where you're getting a drastically different experience. It's not like adapting a video game where there is a high barrier of entry for consuming the story. Watching an animated movie requires you to sit your ass on the couch and press play. And the same exact thing is required of you when watching a live action movie. For the longest time, I refused to watch any of these live action remakes. Disney put out a bunch of them, and I refused to watch any of them. Some people in the comments of my videos told me that the Cinderella live action remake was actually pretty great. Good for you, Cinderella fans. I'm actually thrilled that you got a faithful live action adaptation. I'm jealous, but that's not the point. I simply do not want to encourage these studios to keep making these types of movies and shows. But even with my strong disdain towards these types of adaptations, you could convince me that some of them do deserve a remake. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was made in 1937. Could you convince me that 88 years later there deserves to be a remake? Sure, but that's not all we are getting. We are now getting live action remakes of movies and shows that came out within the past 15 years. How to Train Your Dragon came out 15 years ago, and this year the live action remake comes out. Next year the live action remake of Moana comes out, a mere 10 years after the original animated movie came out. This is pathetic. These animated movies are still of high quality and deserve to be seen as they were originally intended. I don't care how much I love the animated movie. I will not go see the live action remake. However, unfortunately, I am a human being. Sometimes my love and faith for a story is so strong that I can be baited into seeing an adaptation. And this happened with Avatar: The Last Airbender. I love this show so much, and when they announced they were attempting to do a live action show on Netflix, I can't lie, I got my hopes up. I watched the M. Night Shyamalan movie when I was younger, and it was so bad that there was no way they could screw it up again. I was so gassed up on hopium that even after the creators of the animated show left the project, I still had hope for the adaptation. Initial photos came out and things looked promising. Without question, they were staying faithful to the aesthetics of the original series. So when it finally came out in 2024, I broke my rule and decided to watch it. Honestly, I didn't hate it at first. There was clearly passion behind the project, and I have no choice but to respect that. The show is also leagues better than the movie, so I felt compelled to give the show props. I saw the way the kids spoke about the show and their characters, and I wanted nothing more than for them to succeed. But I also have to be real to myself. This adaptation suffers from all of the issues I had with other adaptations. They are simply taking a story, preying on my love for it, and retelling it in a much worse way. The new showrunners came out and admitted they made changes to the perfectly constructed characters because they felt some of the original choices were iffy, because showing Sokka as a flawed sexist teenage boy is somehow a bad thing. They took Katara, one of the best characters in the original show, and took away every single one of her endearing qualities. Anything that made her even remotely feminine was removed. They took away all her agency, and the only character trait the Netflix Katara had is that she likes to fight. Netflix had to take a 20-episode season of 20 minutes each and turn it into an 8-episode season of 45 minutes each. You may think that just because the total runtimes are similar that this is not a problem, but that is not how storytelling works. This is the problem. Live action adaptations are not only the worst types of adaptations because they show no respect for the animated medium, but they still suffer from all the same issues other adaptations suffer from. Creators who either don't care for the source material, creators who think they can do better than the source material, or creators who think they are forced to make changes because times have changed or whatever. Snow White 2025 may or may not be great, but in my eyes, it is just a continuation of a much larger issue. Before we wrap up, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for anyone who wants to stand out online or start a business. Whether you're a content creator like me, or someone who wishes to start their own movie blog, Squarespace is perfect for you. If you sign up today, you can use Blueprint AI to get a fully custom website in just a few steps. Squarespace also offers a complete library of professionally designed and award-winning website templates, so you can use it to design your own beautiful page that will speak to your audience in a way that only you can. If you're looking to build your own store because you're passionate about a product you wish to sell or have a wonderful idea, you can use Squarespace Payments to manage all your earnings in one place. You can set a variety of different prices, tiers, and paywalls, all of that. Pretty much anything that will give your customers their best value. If you're a YouTuber and you wish to upload special behind-the-scenes videos or extended videos, you can do that as well. Create your own Squarespace domain with no hidden fees or add-ons required. Don't wait, invest in your dream domain today. Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thegoldman to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Again, that's squarespace.com/thegoldman to save 10% off your first purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So what do you think about the current state of adaptations? Let me know down below. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to unite the Glot Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.